Farmer. The farmer was the backbone of medieval society because nearly everyone depended on the food they produced. Most families lived in small villages surrounded by fields where they grew crops such as wheat, barley, oats, rye, peas, beans, and vegetables, while also raising cattle, sheep, pigs, and chickens. Their work followed the rhythm of the seasons. Spring was spent plowing and planting. Summer focused on caring for crops and livestock. Autumn brought the busy harvest, and winter was used to repair tools, maintain fences, and prepare for the next growing season. Most medieval farmers relied on simple tools made of wood and iron, along with horses or oxen to pull heavy plows through the fields. Since there were no machines, planting, harvesting, and caring for crops all had to be done by hand. Entire families worked together because there was always another task waiting to be finished. Farmers also looked after their animals every day, milked cows, sheared sheep, gathered eggs, and stored food to survive the colder months.
Life on a medieval farm was difficult and often unpredictable. A drought, flood, harsh winter, or crop disease could ruin an entire year's work and leave villages struggling to find enough food. Many farmers also had to give part of their harvest to their local lord as rent or taxes. Despite these hardships, farmers supported every other profession in medieval society. Their crops fed towns, supplied markets, provided food for castles and armies, and kept kingdoms alive throughout the Middle Ages. Blacksmith. The blacksmith was one of the most important craftsmen in medieval society because almost every profession depended on their work. Inside a workshop centered around a blazing forge, the blacksmith heated iron until it became soft enough to shape before striking it with heavy hammers on an anvil. Their shop was often filled with sparks, smoke, and the ringing sound of metal, making it one of the busiest places in a village or town.
Blacksmiths created an enormous variety of objects. They made horseshoes, farming tools, nails, locks, hinges, cooking utensils, axes, knives, swords, spearheads, and armor repairs. Farmers visited for stronger plows. Builders needed metal fittings for houses, and soldiers relied on them to keep their weapons in good condition. Learning the trade required years of apprenticeship, and experienced blacksmiths could judge the temperature of heated iron simply by its color. Their skills became especially valuable during times of war, when armies needed thousands of weapons and constant repairs. During peaceful years, they kept villages running by fixing broken tools instead of replacing them. Because nearly everyone needed something made of metal, the blacksmith became one of the most respected and reliable members of the community. Without their work, farming, construction, transportation, and even daily household life would have been far more difficult.
Carpenter. Carpenters were responsible for building much of the wooden world people lived in during the Middle Ages. Since wood was one of the most common building materials, skilled carpenters were always in demand. They built houses, barns, bridges, wagons, furniture, fences, market stalls, and even parts of castles and churches. Their work could be found almost everywhere, from small farming villages to large medieval cities. Using saws, chisels, planes, wooden mallets, and measuring tools, carpenters carefully shaped pieces of timber into strong and lasting structures. Every project required careful planning because replacing large pieces of wood was both expensive and time-consuming. They often worked alongside masons and blacksmiths, combining wood, stone, and iron to complete larger buildings. Apprentices usually trained for many years before becoming skilled enough to work on their own. A good carpenter needed patience, precision, and practical knowledge of different types of wood. Some woods were better for building homes, while others were stronger for bridges or wagons. Their craftsmanship helped communities grow as new homes, workshops, mills, and public buildings were constantly being constructed. Many wooden structures have disappeared over time, but during the Middle Ages, they formed the heart of everyday life. Mason. Stonemasons were the craftsmen responsible for building some of the strongest and most impressive structures of the medieval world. Castles, cathedrals, monasteries, bridges, city walls, and defensive towers all depended on their remarkable skill. Unlike wooden buildings, stone structures could survive for centuries, making the masons' work especially valuable to kings, nobles, and the church. Each block of stone had to be carefully cut, shaped, and fitted into place using hammers, chisels, and other specialized tools. The work demanded great physical strength, as well as incredible accuracy, because even a small mistake could weaken an entire building. Large construction projects often lasted for decades, and some cathedrals took more than 100 years to finish. Many masons spent their entire careers working on just one enormous project. Master masons became highly respected because their knowledge combined engineering with craftsmanship. They understood how to build arches, towers, and thick defensive walls that could support tremendous weight. The castles and churches they created became symbols of power, faith, and wealth. Even today, many medieval stone buildings remain standing, serving as lasting reminders of the extraordinary skill these craftsmen possessed.
The miller. The miller operated one of the most important businesses in a medieval village. Nearly every family depended on bread as a daily food, and before bread could be baked, grain had to be ground into flour. Using large millstones powered by water or wind, the miller transformed wheat, barley, oats, and rye into fine flour far more quickly than it could ever be done by hand. For many communities, the village mill was as essential as the church or the marketplace. Running a mill required more than simply turning grain into flour. The miller had to maintain the machinery, sharpen the grinding stones, and make sure the water wheel or windmill worked properly throughout the year. Mechanical problems could stop flour production completely, so regular maintenance was essential. Farmers usually paid the miller with a small portion of their grain, meaning the miller's income depended directly on the success of local harvests. Because almost everyone needed flour, the mill was often one of the busiest places in the village. Farmers gathered there throughout the week, bringing sacks of grain and exchanging news while waiting for their turn. Although some millers gained a reputation for charging unfair fees, most were trusted members of the community, whose work helped keep families fed every day. Without them, producing enough flour for an entire village would have required enormous amounts of time and labor. Baker. The baker provided one of the most important foods in the medieval diet. Bread was eaten by almost everyone, from poor peasants to wealthy nobles, making baking an essential profession in every town and village. Bakers rose long before sunrise to prepare dough so fresh bread would be ready when markets opened. The smell of bread coming from the bakery became a familiar part of everyday life. Preparing bread required both skill and experience. Flour was mixed with water, yeast, and salt before the dough was kneaded and left to rise. It was then baked inside large stone ovens heated with wood fires. Different qualities of bread were available depending on a person's wealth. Rich families often enjoyed fine white bread made from carefully sifted flour, while poorer families usually ate darker bread made from coarser grains, such as rye or barley. Many bakers followed strict rules established by local authorities to ensure bread was sold at fair prices and proper weights. Selling underweight loaves could lead to serious punishment. Beyond bread, bakers often made pies, pastries, and other baked goods for festivals and celebrations. Their work supplied one of the most basic necessities of life, making the bakery one of the busiest and most important businesses in medieval communities. Butcher. The butcher supplied towns and villages with fresh meat, making them an important part of everyday life. While many farming families raised some of their own animals, growing towns depended on professional butchers to prepare meat safely and efficiently. Cattle, pigs, sheep, goats, and chickens were the most common animals processed, providing food for people throughout the year. A butcher's work involved far more than simply cutting meat. Animals had to be slaughtered carefully, cleaned, divided into usable cuts, and preserved before they spoiled. Since refrigeration did not exist, butchers often salted, smoked, or dried meat to make it last longer. Very little of the animal went to waste. Hides became leather,
Bones became tools, fat was used for candles, and horns could be turned into cups or other useful objects. Because cleanliness affected public health, butchers were often required to work in specific parts of town, away from busy markets. Their profession demanded strength, precision, and knowledge of food preservation. During festivals or holidays, demand for meat increased significantly, making these some of the busiest times of the year. Their work ensured that growing medieval populations had access to an important source of nutrition. Fishermen. Fishing was one of the oldest occupations of the Middle Ages and provided food for countless communities located near rivers, lakes, and coastlines. Fish became especially important because many Christians avoided eating meat on certain religious fasting days, increasing demand throughout the year. Fresh and preserved fish could be found in markets across Europe, making fishing both a local trade and a major commercial industry. Fishermen used simple boats along with nets, hooks, traps, and fishing lines to catch many different species. Coastal fishermen often faced dangerous seas and unpredictable weather, while those working on rivers had to understand changing currents and seasonal fish movements. Success depended heavily on experience, patience, and knowledge passed down through generations. Once the catch returned to shore, much of it had to be cleaned and preserved quickly before it spoiled. Salted, dried, and smoked fish could be transported long distances and stored for months, making it valuable for both merchants and travelers. Fishing supported local economies while providing a dependable source of food during seasons when fresh meat was less available. Merchant. Merchants connected medieval towns, kingdoms, and even continents through trade. While most people remained in the same village for their entire lives, merchants traveled great distances, buying and selling valuable goods. Their journeys helped spread products, ideas, technologies, and cultures across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, making them some of the most influential people in medieval commerce. The goods they traded depended on where they traveled. Some specialized in spices, silk, and precious stones brought from distant lands, while others sold cloth, salt, wine, grain, timber, or metal goods produced closer to home. Long journeys often required traveling by horse, wagon, or ship, exposing merchants to storms, thieves, political conflicts, and difficult roads. Successful merchants needed excellent negotiation skills and a good understanding of different markets. As trade expanded, wealthy merchants became increasingly powerful within growing medieval cities. Some joined merchant guilds that protected their businesses and established trading standards. Their success contributed to the rise of prosperous commercial centers and helped transform Europe from a mostly rural society into one with thriving towns and international trade networks. Tailor. The tailor created and repaired clothing for people from every level of medieval society. While basic garments were often made at home, wealthier families, nobles, merchants, and church officials frequently hired professional tailors to produce clothing that fit well and reflected their social position. Fashion changed over time, ensuring there was always demand for skilled craftsmanship. Tailors carefully measured customers before cutting expensive fabrics such as wool, linen, silk, or velvet. Every piece was sewn together by hand using needles, thread, and sharp shears. Decorative details, such as embroidery, buttons, fur trimming, and colorful fabrics, became especially popular among the wealthy. Because cloth was expensive, tailors wasted as little material as possible. A talented tailor needed a steady hand, patience, and an eye for detail. Beyond making new garments, they repaired damaged clothing and adjusted old pieces to fit growing children or changing fashions. Their work allowed people to stay warm, protected, and properly dressed, while also reflecting wealth, occupation, and social status throughout medieval society. Weaver. The weaver transformed spun thread into cloth, creating one of the most important materials of the medieval world. Nearly every person depended on woven fabric for clothing, blankets, sacks, curtains, sails, and countless household items. Weaving was practiced both in family homes and in larger workshops, becoming one of the biggest industries in medieval Europe. Using large wooden looms, weavers carefully crossed threads over and under one another to create strong pieces of fabric. Wool was the most common material in Northern Europe, while linen, made from flax, was also widely used. Wealthier customers could afford imported silk, which required even greater skill to work with. Producing high-quality cloth demanded patience because even a small mistake could ruin an entire section. Finished cloth was often sent to dyers before becoming clothing or other products. Many towns became famous for producing particularly fine fabrics that were traded across Europe. The weaver's work supported tailors, merchants, and countless other professions, making cloth production one of the foundations of the medieval economy. Potter. The potter was responsible for creating many of the everyday objects that medieval families used in their homes. Before metal and glass became common household materials, most people relied on clay pottery for cooking, eating, storing food, and carrying water. Nearly every home contained pottery in some form, making the potter an essential craftsman in both villages and towns. Their products ranged from simple cooking pots used by ordinary families to finely decorated bowls, jugs, and pitchers purchased by wealthier customers. The process began by collecting suitable clay, which was cleaned and mixed with water until it reached the right consistency. The potter then shaped the clay by hand or with the help of a spinning pottery wheel, carefully forming each piece before allowing it to dry. Once dry, the pottery was placed inside a kiln, where extremely high temperatures hardened the clay into durable ceramic. Some pieces were covered with colorful glazes that created a smooth surface, made them more waterproof, and added decorative patterns. Producing high-quality pottery required experience, as even small mistakes in shaping or firing could cause an entire batch to crack or break. Pottery played a vital role in everyday medieval life because it allowed people to safely prepare meals, store grain, preserve liquids, and transport food without spoiling it quickly. Merchants used large ceramic jars to carry products over long distances, while monasteries, castles, and inns depended on thousands of clay vessels every year. Although many medieval wooden objects have disappeared over time, broken pottery survives for centuries underground, making it one of the most valuable sources of information for modern archaeologists studying daily life in the Middle Ages.